Last night, three sisters finally said the words they had been holding inside for 40 years. Words about regret, about sacrifice, about the lives they wished they had lived. And then, their 90-year-old mother told them something that changed everything. She told them the truth about choices, about motherhood, about success, about loss. In this part of the story, they must decide whether they will keep punishing themselves, or finally learn how to live with peace. In part 1, three sisters returned home, carrying decades of silent regret. They compared their lives. They questioned their choices. They blamed themselves for what they didn't become. But in part 2, their mother finally speaks. "My daughters," Eleanor said softly. They looked up at her. "You are all honest. And I love you for that honesty." She paused. "But you are also all wrong." They stared at her, confused. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her cane resting against her chair. "You are being unfair to yourselves." She looked at each of them, one by one. "You cannot be everything." Her voice was gentle but firm. "No woman can be everything. No person can be everything." She let that sit for a moment. There is no life without trade-offs. Every choice has a cost. Eleanor looked at Maggie first. "Margaret, you chose stability. You chose to teach, to raise your children with consistency and presence. You chose a steady life with a good man." Maggie nodded, tears still on her face. "And yes, you are still paying a mortgage at 58. Yes, money has always been tight. Yes, you wonder when you'll finally get to rest." Eleanor's voice softened. "But your children are here, Margaret. All three of them. And your grandson." She gestured toward the hallway. "They came home. They wanted to be here. They chose to be here." Maggie's throat tightened. "That didn't happen by accident," Eleanor said. "That happened because you were there. Every day, every struggle, every moment." She paused. "You paid for that closeness with money you never had. With dreams you set aside. With a career that never quite took off." Eleanor's eyes were steady. "But you did get something, Margaret. You got a family that knows you. That comes home to you." Maggie covered her mouth with her hand, crying quietly. Eleanor turns to Hannah. Eleanor looked at her youngest daughter. "Hannah, you chose motherhood. Completely. Fully. You gave everything to those 4 children." Hannah nodded, unable to speak. "And yes, you paid a terrible price for it." Eleanor's voice was sad but honest. "You gave up your independence. Your education. Your dreams of being something more than a mother." She paused. "And you married a man who has controlled you for 40 years. Who has made you beg for money. Who has made you feel small." Hannah's face crumpled. "That is real, Hannah. That pain is real. And I am sorry." Eleanor reached out and took Hannah's hand. "But look around this room." Hannah looked up, tears streaming. 4 children. All of them here. All of them healthy. All of them grown into good people. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You were there for every skinned knee. Every bad dream. Every hard day. Every moment they needed you." Her voice grew softer. "And now, even though your marriage is broken and your independence is gone, they are still yours." She paused. "They know you. They love you. They came home to you." Hannah sobbed quietly. "You paid for that with yourself, Hannah. With your freedom. With your dreams." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "And I wish you hadn't had to pay so much." She held Hannah's hand tightly. "But what you built is real. And it is yours. Eleanor turns to Claire. Finally, Eleanor turned to her eldest daughter, Claire, who had stopped crying but looked utterly broken. Claire, Eleanor said softly. Claire looked up. You chose ambition. You chose success. You chose to build something extraordinary in a world that told women they couldn't. Claire's jaw tightened. And you did build it. You became powerful, respected, wealthy. Eleanor's voice was full of pride and grief. You provided for this family in ways your father and I never could. You paid off this house. You made sure I never had to worry. She paused. You gave your children every opportunity. The best education. The best life. Eleanor's eyes were sad now. But you paid for it with time. With presence. With closeness. Claire closed her eyes. And now your children are grown and they are strangers. And your husband is a stranger. And your colleagues have moved on. Eleanor's voice cracked. And you are alone. Claire's shoulders shook again. That is the price you paid, Claire. And it is a terrible price. Eleanor leaned forward. But it is also true that you built something. You opened doors for other women. You proved it could be done. She paused. And this house, is still standing because of you. Claire looked up, tears streaming. You think you failed because your children didn't come home. But Claire, you gave them the freedom to build their own lives. You gave them independence. Eleanor's voice was gentle. They are not here because you taught them they didn't need to be. Claire covered her face. That is both your success and your loss. There is no perfect life. Eleanor sat back in her chair, exhausted. My daughters, she said quietly. You are all sitting here wishing you had lived someone else's life. She looked at each of them. Maggie, you wish you had Claire's money and career. Hannah, you wish you had independence and education. Claire, you wish you had the closeness that Maggie and Hannah have with their children. She paused. But you are all wrong to think that a different choice would have saved you from pain. Her voice grew firmer. Because every choice costs something. She let that settle. There is no life without trade-offs. There is no choice without loss. Eleanor's eyes moved between them. The part of life you feed the most is the part that grows. She pointed at Maggie. You fed your family. So your family grew strong. She pointed at Hannah. You fed your children. So, your children stayed close. She pointed at Claire. You fed your career. So your career grew powerful. Her voice softened. But you cannot feed everything at once. She shook her head. You cannot be the CEO and the room mother. You cannot build an empire and be home for dinner every night. You cannot give everything to your children and still have something left for yourself. Her voice cracked. It is not fair, but it is true. Stop measuring your life with someone else's ruler. Eleanor looked at her daughters with fierce love. You are all punishing yourselves for not living a life that was never possible. She paused. Claire, you cannot have both the corner office and the family dinners. Not the way you wanted them both. Hannah, you cannot give yourself entirely to your children and keep yourself whole. Maggie, you cannot survive on a teacher's salary and live without financial stress. She leaned forward. Stop measuring your life with someone else's ruler. Her voice grew stronger. Stop looking at your sister's life and thinking, that is what I should have done. She shook her head. Because if you had lived her life, you would be sitting here with her regrets. The room was silent. There is no perfect life. Eleanor's voice was firm now. There is no perfect motherhood. There is no perfect career. There is no perfect balance. She looked at each of them. There is only the life you lived. And the courage to make peace with it. We are all paying for something. Eleanor's voice softened again. In the end, my daughters, we are all paying for something. She gestured toward Maggie. You paid with money and dreams. She gestured toward Hannah. You paid with freedom and self. She gestured toward Claire. You paid with closeness and time. She folded her hands. But what matters now is not what you lost. Her eyes filled with tears. What matters is whether you can finally honor what remains. She looked at Maggie. You have children who love you. A husband who stayed. A life that was steady and kind. She looked at Hannah. You have 4 children who came home. Who know you. Who are proud to be yours. She looked at Claire. You have built something that mattered. You provided for people you loved. You made sure this family never went without. Eleanor's voice shook. Each of you gave something. And each of you lost something. She paused. And both are true. It is time to forgive yourselves. Eleanor wiped her eyes. It is time to stop punishing yourselves for being human. Her voice was almost a whisper now. You did the best you could with what you knew. With what you had. With what the world allowed you. She looked at each of them. And now you are 60. 58. 61. She smiled sadly. And you are still here. You are still standing. You are still loved. She reached out her hands. 6. So stop asking, what if I had chosen differently? Her voice grew firm again. And start asking, what do I do with what remains? The room was completely silent. 3 daughters stared at their mother. This woman who had lived 90 years. Who had loved and lost and survived. Who had raised them and watched them struggle and never stopped believing they were enough. And slowly, something shifted. Not healing. Not yet. But understanding. They had not failed. They had simply chosen. And every choice had taken something. Eleanor looked at her daughters and saw them finally, truly, for the first time in years. Not as successes or failures. Not as the lives they should have lived. But as the women they were. Imperfect. Wounded. Still standing. Still here. The house was quiet. Not the heavy silence of loneliness, but the softer quiet of peace. The sun came through the kitchen windows in pale gold streaks, warming the old wooden table where Eleanor had fed 3 daughters thousands of breakfasts over the years. Claire was the first one up. She had always been an early riser. Years of pre-market conference calls had trained her body to wake before dawn. She stood in the kitchen in her pajamas and robe, making coffee. The same coffee pot her mother had used for 30 years. The same cups. She poured herself a mug and stood by the window, looking out at the backyard. The same yard where she used to play as a child. Where her father used to grill on summer evenings. Where time had somehow both stopped and disappeared. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Maggie appeared in the doorway, her hair still messy from sleep, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. You're up early, Maggie said. Old habits, Claire said with a small smile. Maggie poured herself coffee and stood beside Claire at the window. They didn't speak for a moment. Just stood there, sisters, drinking coffee, watching the morning light. I'm sorry, Claire said quietly. Maggie looked at her. For what? For, I don't know. For making you feel like I had it all figured out. Claire's voice was soft. For making you think my life was better than yours. Maggie shook her head. You didn't make me think that. I did that to myself. She paused. I looked at your success and convinced myself that I had failed. She turned to Claire. But Mom was right. We just paid different prices. Claire nodded, her throat tight. I look at your kids, she said. At the way they came home. At the way they love you. She swallowed hard. And I would trade everything I have for that. Maggie reached out and took Claire's hand. But you gave me this house, Claire. You made sure Mom and Dad never had to worry. You took care of all of us in ways I never could. Her voice cracked. You didn't fail either. They stood there, hand in hand, crying quietly in the morning light. Two sisters who had spent 40 years comparing. Finally seeing each other clearly. Hannah joins them. A few minutes later, Hannah came downstairs. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well, but calmer than she had the night before. Is there coffee? She asked. Always, Claire said, pouring her a cup. Hannah took it gratefully and sat at the kitchen table. Claire and Maggie joined her. The three of them sat there, just like they used to as children, around the same table where they'd done homework and fought over toys and told each other secrets. I called Mark last night, Hannah said quietly. Her sisters looked at her. I told him I'm done asking for money. Her voice was steady but quiet. I told him that when I get home, things are going to change. Claire's eyes widened. What did he say? Hannah laughed bitterly. He said I was being dramatic. That I was overreacting. She looked down at her coffee. But I'm not. I'm 60 years old. And I'm done. Maggie reached across the table and took Hannah's hand. What are you going to do? Maggie asked gently. I don't know yet, Hannah admitted. But Mom was right. I need to stop punishing myself for the choices I made. She looked up at her sisters. I gave everything to my children. And I don't regret that. Her voice grew firmer. But I also deserve to have something for myself. Even if it's just dignity. Claire nodded. If you need help, financially, or with anything. Hannah smiled sadly. I know. Thank you. She paused. But I think I need to figure this out on my own. For once. Eleanor appears. They heard the slow tap of a cane on the floor. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, moving carefully, leaning heavily on her cane. You're all up early, she said with a small smile. Couldn't sleep, Hannah said. Come sit with us, Mom, Maggie said, standing to help her. Eleanor waved her off. I can manage. She moved slowly to the table and sat down with a heavy sigh. Claire poured her a cup of coffee, exactly the way Eleanor liked it, with cream and 1 sugar. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at her 3 daughters. How are you this morning? She asked. They looked at each other. Tired, Claire said. Sad, Maggie added. But okay, Hannah finished. Eleanor nodded. Good. She took a sip of her coffee. Last night was hard, she said. But it was necessary. She looked at each of them. You have been carrying your regrets for too long. Alone. She paused. Now you know you are not alone. You are my daughters. Eleanor set down her cup. I want to tell you something, she said. They leaned in slightly. I have watched you grow. I have watched you struggle. I have watched you build your lives, different lives, hard lives, imperfect lives. Her voice was strong despite her age. And I have been proud of all of you. Every single day. Her eyes filled with tears. Not because you were successful. Not because you were perfect. She shook her head. But because you kept going. Even when it was hard. Even when you doubted yourselves. Even when you felt like you had failed. She reached out and put her hands on the table, palms up. Claire, Maggie, and Hannah each reached out and took one. You are my daughters, Eleanor said, her voice shaking now. And you are enough. She looked at Claire. You are enough. She looked at Maggie. You are enough. She looked at Hannah. You are enough. Tears streamed down all their faces. Not because of what you accomplished. Not because of what you sacrificed. Eleanor's voice broke. But because you are mine. And I love you. She squeezed their hands. And it is time for you to love yourselves. The final moment. They sat there for a long time. 4 women around a kitchen table. 90, 61, 58, 60. A lifetime of love and loss and choices between them. Outside, the sun rose higher. Inside, the house filled with the sounds of the family waking up, children's voices, footsteps upstairs, little Owen calling for his mother. Life continuing. Imperfect. Messy. Real. Eleanor looked at her daughters one more time. Promise me something, she said. Anything, they said together. Promise me you will stop comparing. Stop punishing yourselves. Stop wishing for someone else's life. She paused. Promise me you will live what remains. With kindness. With forgiveness. Her voice was almost a whisper now. For yourselves. And for each other. Claire nodded, tears streaming. I promise. Maggie squeezed her mother's hand. I promise. Hannah wiped her eyes. I promise. Eleanor smiled. Good. She looked around the table at her daughters, these 3 women who had become strangers to each other and were now finding their way back. Then my work is done. Epilogue. 3 months later. Claire returned to her life in New York. But something had changed. She called her children, not every Sunday at 3 p.m. like clockwork, but randomly. Just to say hello. Just to check in without needing a reason. Michael answered more often now. Surprised at first, then warming to the calls. Sophia started texting more. Small things. Funny things. Real things. It wasn't fixed. But it was beginning. And Claire stopped saying yes to every conference, every gala, every board meeting. She started saying yes to lunch with old friends, real friends, not contacts. She started walking in the park. She started reading books that had nothing to do with business. She was still alone sometimes. But she was learning that alone didn't have to mean lonely. Maggie went home to Ohio. To the house with the mortgage. To David and the familiar routine. But she pulled out the box from the attic. The one with the notebooks. The stories she had written 40 years ago. And she started writing again. Not for publication. Not for money. Not for anything except herself. She wrote in the mornings before David woke up. She wrote about her life. Her children. Her quiet dreams. And slowly, she started to remember who she had been before she became Mom and Mrs. Lewis. She was still 58. Still paying a mortgage. But she was also a writer again. And that was enough. Hannah went home to Mark. To the same house. The same struggles. But she stopped asking for money. She opened her own bank account with money her children had given her for her birthday over the years, money she had never felt allowed to spend. She got a part-time job at the library. It didn't pay much, but it was hers. When Mark complained, she didn't argue. She just quietly kept going. She didn't leave him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she stopped disappearing. And her children noticed. They called more. Visited more. Mom, you seem different, Sarah said one day. Hannah smiled. I'm just here. And for the first time in years, she meant it. Eleanor Parker died peacefully in her sleep 4 months after that weekend. She was 90 years old. At her funeral, her 3 daughters stood together. They cried. They held each other. They remembered. And they understood finally what their mother had been trying to tell them. There is no perfect life. There is no perfect motherhood. There is no perfect choice. There is only the life you lived, and the courage to honor what remains. The end. We are all paying for something. And what matters is not what we lost, but whether we can finally honor what remains. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own life, then you are not alone. Subscribe and stay with us. Because these stories are for people who are still healing, still hoping, still standing.